G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. Today we are tackling the final position of our positional run through, the bloody ruckman. So we're going to go through all the options that we should be considering for our fantasy classic teams. Let's go!
Just done it from nowhere. Hoisted the goal from inside the centre. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty. Petty. Petrarca. Oh, wow. How good is that? The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. Today, talking the rucks with my good mate Luke. How are you, mate?
I'm going good, mate. I'm going good. You can find me at LukeRojo17 on Twitter. We're recording on Australia Day today, so
happy holidays to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. We were thinking about maybe substituting the waters for beers, but perhaps a little bit early. I've just brushed
9:30 in
my
the morning.
teeth, so
yeah,
we'll wait a little bit, I think.
We'll be having some beers later, so
I think this position might drive us to drinking.
Yeah, I think so. We've been putting this one off a little while.
For good reason.
The ruckman.
Look, researching this position, Mitch, I almost got to the point where I thought we should just put names in a hat.
Just pull them out, see who comes up.
There's so much to talk about. I will get into it, but we've got club changes that are like going to significantly impact this position.
Yep.
We've got
sub rules that might come in and mess us around.
We've got you name it, we've got it. So I'm excited to talk about them, but I'm kind of apprehensive at the same time.
They're one of the most important positions. Historically, obviously, we've had the old famous set and forget, which was reliable when we had, Grundy and Gawn sort of in different teams from each other, and they were sort of the big dogs at the top there. It was a very easy thing for us to do. I remember the first season I played AFL Fantasy, I heard all about the set and forget thing, went and just paid up for the big dogs, and it was a gloriously simple season for rucks. I think it was 2019 or something like that.
I think I've mentioned this before as well. Last season was my first season, and I think I've mentioned that a lot of people set and forget, Luke, this is how you play fantasy, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. So set and forget, okay, no problems. I'll whack Gawn and Grundy in there, and we all know how that turned out last year. So that kind of contributes to what we're looking at now in the preseason as being a pretty kind of open ruck race in some ways. Yeah,
so obviously the big news that's shaking everything up is Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy on the same team at the Melbourne Demons. So the previous year's set and forgets playing together. So we might as well just start there, I reckon. If we just start with the two Demons guys. Max, the most expensive ruck in the game, $914,000, priced at $103. Grundy getting a little bit of a discount, but discounted on his 2021 average. So he's priced at $94,000, $830,000. Playing on the same team. Just from a 40 point of view, before we get into the fantasy implications, like how do we expect this to work for the Melbourne Demons? Who do you expect to be seeing more ruck time? Yep. Is it sort of like a matchup based thing? What are your thoughts in terms of how the footy club's actually going to run it?
I think we could be victims of a few different scenarios, to be honest, Mitch. When you have such impressive ruck stocks, you can almost get a little bit situational, if you know what I mean. So you mentioned, depending on which teams they're taking on each week might actually dictate how those guys play, which, to us from a fantasy perspective, is horrible because we want kind of consistency and
clarity.
I think that the notion out there, and I probably tend to subscribe to this notion, is that of the two of them, the more damaging forward, although his set shot might indicate
hopefully
otherwise.
He's working on that.
But the more damaging forward is probably Max Gawn, just in terms of his ability to take a big overhead mark.
Bigger target.
I mentioned the set shot, and the set shot hopefully might come along for the ride for him. But so I think the notion out there is Gawn's probably a more dangerous forward, and therein Grundy might take most of the centre bounces and around the ground ruck contests. But for me, you could still kind of throw that all up in the air, and that could change throughout the year as well. So I know I'm not giving any great insight here, but it's just so unknown at the moment.
We also should mention that Max Gawn has had, in the last week or so, a hamstring issue that has sort of set him back a little bit in the preseason. Now, I think it's supposed to be fairly minor. I think he's back running and stuff like that, and should be back to full training within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So hopefully he's there and abouts for the practice matches and things like that. But just something a little bit there to monitor. He is obviously the older of the two. I want to say, was he like 33, 34 years old? But I think that for the most part, if you look at their last 5 seasons, do you want to have a guess at what they've averaged over the last 5 seasons, the both of them?
So I'll guess for Gawn. So Gawn over the last 5 seasons, 107?
It's higher.
It's higher, 110?
Yeah, higher.
Jeez. 115?
111 is our max. And Grundy...
Grundy went big in a couple of seasons.
He had two seasons where he's gone big.
Yeah, so let's go 115.
111 as
111.
well.
Okay.
So they're both smack bang 111 over the past 5 seasons, which I thought was pretty crazy. Coincidental. So by far and away the best ruckman that we've had over the last
Gawn's
5
COVID
years.
season, I know we throw COVID out, but Gawn's COVID season, 98.
Yeah, he crushed it. Obviously,
that's almost
the shortened quarters, I think, helped him. He was one of those guys that played like 95% game time, 98% game time, like a Lachie Neale. But yeah, he was obviously really good that year. Grundy has slowed down a little bit the last couple of seasons. And I will say that, so if we compare the CBAs from both of these players, last year Gawn averaged 103 on 66% CBAs.
Yep.
Grundy has typically needed 85 to 90% CBAs to get his big scores. So in my opinion, in terms of like scoring ability, Max is probably the player that relies less on those CBAs than a Grundy. I think Grundy's a little bit more useless away from the ruck contest. So in terms of viability throughout the season, I think that Gawn might be a little bit more viable. Maybe he does pick up a DPP and become a forward for us later. There's lots of scenarios that could play out. So I agree with you, but I think that, like we said, comparing the two, like Grundy's not getting 80 to 90% CBA.
No, it's not happening.
It'll be like that 66%, 33% at most, I would say. And so for me, that kind of limits Grundy a lot. Because I think that he does need that 80 to 85% at least to sort of be around that 100, 105 mark. Whereas Max, say if Max is still getting, like say if they are splitting it 50-50, or it's the opposite way and he's the 60%, Grundy's the 40%, then Max still might be there or thereabouts, the sort of high 90s, maybe even cracking the 100 in that kind of a role, because he is able to get points outside of those ruck contests.
So to piggyback on the stat that the point that you kind of mentioned before, last year Gawn actually only had 2 games where he accounted for more than 80% of his team's hitouts. So to give that kind of context, in the 2021 season, which was Grundy's last full season, almost all of his games he accounted for more than 80%.
He was by far the most dominant ruckman.
In those 2 games where Gawn accounted for 80% or more of his team's hitouts, his scores were 149 and 132.
Okay, big scores.
So if Max Gawn is the ruckman, the only ruckman playing in the ruck, he scores big. Yeah. Now, we know that's not going to be the case this year. Now, to kind of go to the other side of that stat, which worried me a little bit, but I'd probably have to do a little bit more digging. Last year, in the 7 games where he had less than 70% of his team's hitouts, he averaged 85.
Yeah.
So for me, I look at that and say, okay, is Gawn going to have less than 70% of Melbourne's hitouts in games next year? I'd have to think so with Grundy there, and 85. So 7-game sample, we do talk about this. It's easy to pick and choose. It is. But
that's all we've got to go off.
Yeah, that's it. And it was just something that kind of... made me think a little bit.
I think this is all to say you can't start with either of them. I don't think you can start with either of them.
Yeah, especially with Gawn priced as the
if they're both as healthy as we, if they're both there round one, you can't start with either of them. If there's an injury to one of them, obviously it changes everything completely. And this is where I think that maybe a lot of talk isn't out there at the moment in the season, that the whole notion of set and forget. I don't think we're necessarily this season trying to replace the old set and forget with a new set and forget, because...
So you think forget set and forget?
Forget set and forget. Let's forget set and forget. I'm sure we can all do well on the forget part, but I think in terms of like because so many things can change throughout the season that changes who the top 2 ruckmen are. So say you think that, and again, we'll talk about these guys later, but if you think the new set and forget is Marshall and Tim English, we'll say halfway through the season, Max Gawn goes down with an injury and Grundy comes in, he's rucking 90% of the time. Well, now Grundy's the number 1 ruckman, and he could go huge from there. So your previous set and forget, you're now trying to trade to get Grundy, so it's no longer, you're no longer top 2.
Of all the positions, this position is most significantly affected by injuries, in my opinion. Because,
I think so.
At any club, you might have 3 ruckmen, 2 of which can potentially actually play league footy.
Yep.
And the minute there's an injury there, that completely changes.
Throws it off, Yes. And we saw that last year with Grundy's injury, facing Darcy Cameron. Again, we'll talk about him later, but... These things, I think, can change a lot throughout the season. So my early thinkings is that I want to treat this more like any other position that I have in the past. So a lot of the times we kind of maybe not looking for quite as much value in the ruck line. We want to be a little bit more towards the top because we don't want to mess around with those rucks positions. But I think this year in particular, I want to leave yourself open to the idea that something might change, and then you can jump on that and sort of make the most of those opportunities if they do present themselves. So that's just my early thinkings from like a more strategic point of view. In saying that maybe, it could go either way. Who's to know? But that's just sort of my early thinkings.
So before we move on, just quickly, did you agree with my point that you think Gawn is probably more of the forward guy than Grundy is?
I think so at this stage, yes. I agree with you. He's obviously probably a bigger target, better at taking those overhead grabs than a Grundy. His kicking form is shocking, though. It is so bad.
Nervous, I
never feel comfortable, no matter where he is lining up in front of those goals, that he's going to convert this. Look, I suppose you can hang your hat on that one. So I think it was a prelim final a couple of seasons ago. He kicked 5 or 6. I can't quite remember, but he obviously did really good. And I think maybe Melbourne are trying to hang on to that game and cross their fingers.
A lot of people are, I think.
But yeah, from what I've seen the last sort of little while, his set shot definitely just gives me the nerves.
Like you said, the thing he has over Grundy is that I would think he's a better pack contested mark, and you got to take those marks to even be having the set shot. So
let's move on to the next guy here. So this is where people might be considering the new, like we said, set and forget. Tim English. Last season, had a breakout year. I'm still annoyed that I didn't start with him after seeing that Steph Martin wasn't named in round 1. But we move on.
So even had you started with him, you would have had to trade him pretty early on.
Yes, he did get injured, obviously, earlier on. So averaged 101.8, so 102. So that's where he's priced at this season. 901,000, the second most expensive ruck in the comp. Now, he obviously is someone that we feel comfortable because we have no longer got Stephen Martin in the team.
Yep.
We've got Rory Lobb coming over from Freo, who's notoriously against rucking and loves playing as more of a forward, chopping out in the rucks. So we feel really secure in his role. He's the younger kind of ruckman, up and coming. He's had raps on him from a junior as being a potential sort of Grundy-like scorer in terms of fantasy. So we like him, and if I was drafting, he would be the first ruck that I would be drafting off the board. I feel the most safe with him.
Yep.
My issue with a Tim English, and I think I did say that he was my first pick back in the day, but a lot of research since then, he's over 900,000.
Yep.
Priced at 102. How much, if any, do we expect him to be better than that? And is it worth just paying up for that guy that we expect to be the number 1 ruck? But like I said before, if something changes to either Max or Grundy, like he could be the number 1 ruck, and then all of a sudden someone else overtakes him. We'll talk about Rowan Marshall. He could be behind him if things go right that way. So to me, I'm starting to lean a little bit away from a Tim English just in terms of the value that I think maybe be lacking in a player like him versus some other options.
Yeah, he did average 100, and that does mean he's priced at around 900k. Although he averaged 100, he missed games. And when I go back and I look at last season, I see a big chunk, 5 games missed, and I think he had a concussion. He missed 2 weeks later in the season. If your intention is to pick Tim English as your new set and forget, you can't set and forget a guy when he's not on the park.
Yeah.
So that's at least 2 trades, or potentially some people would have made 4 trades with Tim English, get him out, get him back in, and then he's concussed, get him out, get him back in. So it's. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. He's priced so high now, I don't see him suddenly coming out and going 115 for the season. But I also see that there is the potential for maybe him to be a little bit injury prone.
He's 25 years old, so he's still very much improving. We often sort of say that ruckmen take a little bit longer than a lot of other positions. So 25-year-old for a ruckman, still kind of on the increase, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Last year, when he played games where he was, if I've got the stat in front of me, when he played games without another ruckman, so sometimes they'd have like a suite or someone that they throw in there. Stephen Martin did play a couple of games together with him. He averaged 105.6. So if we sort of round that up and we say he's 106 averaging ruckman this season, there's a little bit of value there. There's maybe sort of 4 or 5 points that could go on top of his head. I don't know if I feel like I'm worried about injury or durability concerns. I mean, concussion. He's had a few of those in the past, so maybe they're a little bit more cautious with those kind of things. But I don't know if you can go out there and predict a concussion for a player and not pick him because of that reason.
Soft head.
Maybe. he's got a big head, so
look, of the kind of like quote unquote premium ruckman.
Yeah.
Other than one guy who we're waiting on his role, and we'll talk about him in a sec, he's the guy that I would most be likely to pick. Like, I'm not going to pick Grundy or Gawn to start the season.
Yeah.
And
his role feels the most secure in the safest.
It does. There's another fella we're sort of about to talk about, and we're waiting on his role. A lot of people will be interested in him, but of the guys that I'm confident in his role and that he's in that premium category, he's the guy that I'd be most likely to pick. But do I feel good about it? You can see my face. I'm kind of screwing up a little bit. Like, I don't feel good about it.
No. And 900,000, is he captain?
Expensive.
Is he a captain option? No, not really. He's not good enough to be a captain option. So, look, I'm not ruling it out. He's definitely in my considerations, and I think he's one of the more popular players in AFL Fantasy.
Do you know his percentage?
Let me actually just look that up. Where have I've lost it here. Oh, no, sorry. Wrong price bracket. So he is 33% owned in AFL Fantasy.
Which is that'd be one of the highest ruckman, wouldn't it?
I believe that is one of the highest. If I double check some of the other guys, so he is the most owned ruckman in AFL Fantasy, 1% higher than Rowan Marshall. So he's obviously a very popular pick. I think if you do want to subscribe to that quote-unquote set and forget, I think he is the safest option of all of the ruckmen, and probably presents himself with the highest floor, just because of the security of that role. But in terms of ceiling, whilst I think there is still room for him to grow just being a younger ruckman, there's a few games I expect that you're not going to have Jordan Sweets and Stephen Martins in there as much. So I think some of those lower floor games might just boost up a little bit. So I can see him going 105 to 110, like that kind of a range, potentially as sort of like a ceiling result for him. But I guess the question is that enough? And, could you use that money that you might save by going to someone cheaper for a better player elsewhere in your field? Yeah,
that's probably the thing. If he goes 105, then I'd have to say he's going to be in the top 3 ruckmen in the year.
I'd say so, yeah. I'd comfortably say that.
So the question is, do you want to start with the top 3 ruckmen and just go bang?
Yep.
Or, like you said, I think the key is, do you try and use cash elsewhere? So I'm just so intrigued to see what people do in this position. Hey?
Yeah, and that's the thing as well, because we always talk about, we've broken things down into positions and things like that, but it's never a one-to-one comparison. It's like, okay, if I've got 900k invested here, and then I've got all this money spread out here, what can I do with that other money? So it's never just comparing two players together. Yeah. It's the money that you save and what you can do with that, and sometimes we won't know the answer until after the fact. So it is interesting discussion. Right now, he's very much in calculations for me to be in my team, but it's very much a structure-dependent discussion. So I think he's definitely a good option depending on what you want to do. Let's talk about the next guy here, Riley O'Brien. He's got some ceiling about him, but he's got a lot of floor. He's famously a player that you put into your fantasy team. You never watch him play. You just watch the scores
you just hope
tick over.
It's a 158.
You watch the scores tick over because the man does not move very elegantly.
I got to give my props to Riley O'Brien. He's carved out an AFL career, but I don't think there's a guy in the AFL that moves less like an AFL player than Riley O'Brien.
And the way he kicks and
I know ruckmen aren't known for their silky smooth movement, but this guy
he takes us to another level, doesn't he?
Oh man, but good on him.
He was a breakout guy that we had sort of sitting on our benches a few years ago. He was kind of like that sort of player that you weren't sure if you pay up enough to have on your benches, and then all of a sudden one year just went bang and took over. So he was a big reason. I think might have been 2019, 2020 or something like that.
2019 average 95.
2019 just went absolutely exploded onto scene, was a big reason the winner won that season. But since then, a little bit up and down, and last year he actually got dropped from the Adelaide Crows team. So I don't know, that kind of... I don't necessarily expect that to happen again, but it does kind of... doesn't fill me with confidence if your ruckman's just getting dropped on performance.
Yeah, he's so up and down that I can't really see him ever averaging like 105, 110. He'll go off for a huge game. He might win your final with like a 160 or something
your
like
league
that.
Final,
but just for me personally, I've said it before, I can't ride that kind of roller coaster.
Yeah.
I can't pick a guy and go, he's going to average 95, but I'm going to get a 30 and then I'm going to get a 170.
Yeah.
That for me... gives me anxiety.
yeah. Like, you just look at, like, the midway through the season, round 8, 61 points, that's when he was dropped. Came back, round 11, 159.
It kind of encapsulates it,
the next week, 74. Like, it's all over the shop. And all of those games, he's pretty much up there in terms of CBAs. Like, he's got a very secure role.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at DFS, Australia.com, like, it's 90s, 80s across the board for the entire season. There's 2 games where he's dipped below 80%. So, role is locked in and secure, but in saying that, that means there's not much upside for his role to get better, and even with the role that he's demonstrate that yo-yo type sort of scoring. So for me, I think Calvinator said it best, where he's like the most consistently inconsistent ruckman in the comp.
I didn't hear that, but that's well said.
I subscribe to that. And for me, look, maybe he starts the season to a blinder, but I think it'll average out in the end. So I think he kind of is what he is. So for me, he doesn't really come into my calculations too much.
Just a lot of people already know this, but just that word of caution, if he does come out in round 1 and he goes 160, just
maybe jump on.
Take it with a grain of salt. If you got on and he just continued to do that, all power to you. But history tells us that it's not going to be there the whole season.
This next guy is, I want to spend a little time on this boy.
We will, I think.
Rowan Marshall from the Saints.
My goodness.
I started with him last year. I was very well aware of the risk that I was taking at the time. I think it was Paddy Ryder had the Achilles sort of stuff leading into round 1. I was thinking, 34, 35-year-old guy, Achilles. Went good. I think he had like 108 round 1. I was feeling pretty good about myself. And then even in round 2, like Jack Hayes out of nowhere starts getting a lot of ruck time, and and he split that, and then Paddy Ryder came back to the scene, so he went south really quickly. But the thing with Marshall, obviously, it's very obvious that he is an absolute gun when he's the sole ruckman, and suffers a little bit more when he plays a bit more of that half-half or predominantly forward role. So
I got a stat for you if you want to take it.
Yeah,
so again, it's a 7-game sample size, but it's last year. So in the 7 games that he won 90% or more of his team's hit-outs, what do you think he averaged?
I'd be at least 112.
120.
Yeah,
119.
There you go.
So it's so role dependent. I think you said Tim English was 33% owned. If 32, sorry.
English is 33. So Marshall is 32.
Yeah, so if Ross the Boss comes out tomorrow and says Rowan Marshall will be our sole ruck for the whole season, I think
it should be 100%.
It should go through the roof.
That should be, you lock him in. To sort of build off your stat, I've sort of got a similar kind of stat, although I've actually taken it over the last 2 seasons as well.
Yep.
So let's say just take last season, for example, when he averaged 60% or more CBAs. So when he wasn't just splitting the time half-half or as a forward, he averaged 114.5. In the last 2 seasons, when he was playing in games without Paddy Ryder, so fair sample size here, 112 in average across those games. When he's playing 60% or fewer CBAs, averages 74.
Yeah.
So there's nearly a 40-point swing there between his ceiling scores and when he's playing as a forward. Now, a lot of people... Sorry, you go first.
I was just going to say, kind of linking into that role dependency, every fantasy football coach's most hated man at the moment is young Tom Campbell. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's probably a lovely fella, but Tom Campbell is the name that is on everyone's lips in terms of Rowan Marshall's role. So Tom Campbell's kind of St Kilda's other ruckman, I'd suppose. And right at the end of the year, he played the last game, I believe it was. And that significantly affected Rowan Marshall's score. I think he scored 47. So he's not a good sharer, Rowan Marshall. I imagine he wouldn't have been good in the sandpit at play school. He likes playing by himself and doing his own thing. So. He does. So everyone will be kind of watching what happens with Tom Campbell and Rowan Marshall in the preseason. A little article come out and just said Tom Campbell was suffering a little bit with Achilles soreness and wasn't expected to get back to full fitness until March. But that's not to say that he won't be there starting round one. So
do you know how old Tom Campbell is?
I just called him a young fella.
He's 31. Like, the mate's 31.
What's going on?
He's not this up-and-coming ruckman that we've got to, like,
I didn't even get onto that.
Like, he's, like, I don't... And I know that AFL coaches don't always subscribe to the logic that us fantasy coaches have, but I don't know why you would be taking ruck time away from Rowan Marshall, who's 27, clearly your best ruckman on the team. And not even just from a fantasy point of view. Like, the man is mobile. Like,
I'm shook by that.
He reminds me a little bit like a Grundy type, where he's good around the ground. He can be kind of like that sort of fifth midfielder, sort of. But he's a great mark. He's excellent tackler. He applies lots of pressure. Like, I don't know why you're forcing Tom Campbell into the team.
You guys can't see it on the pod, but Mitch has got the shakes here. Like that a 31-year-old is taking away Rowan Marshall's
time. There's no 30-year-old. Doesn't everyone know that?
We know how much you hate 30-year-olds. So, that's ridiculous. I needed to do more digging because I didn't know that. But he's
been playing since 2012, Tom Campbell, and he's never played more than 9 games in a season, which was back in 2016. So,
sorry, Tom. I had some sympathy when I thought you were like 21 years old, but now that you're 30,
I'm hoping that logic prevails and that it's not going to be a major hurdle for us in 2023, because Rowan Marshall, to me, is by far and away the best ruckman on this team. Jack Hayes is coming off an ACL, I believe, and I know that there was a game like that second round last year where he got, like, they sort of split the ruck kind of like 50-50.
Yeah.
To me, that seems like Jack Hayes is an excellent, from what we saw in limited sample size, he was a really good mark up forward, really good target as a forward player. So I think that hopefully, especially coming off, a major injury, that he is playing a bit more of that forward role. So for me, I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to see Rowan Marshall for the majority of the season as that number one ruck. So for me right now, he's sitting in my team.
Yeah, same for me.
Look, I think we have to be prepared that there's going to be some ups and downs throughout the season, but I'm hoping that for the most part we're going to get good Rowan Marshall than bad Rowan Marshall, and his good is, in my opinion, the best in the comp. Yeah. So I think that it would not surprise me at all. In fact, I'm predicting it right now that he's going to be the number one ruckman this season, barring any major role changes.
So it might be a good time to talk now. What's your opinion on just the way the AFL is going? Do you think the AFL is going towards a 2 ruckman strategy? Do you think the AFL, for a few years there, it was like a 1 ruckman strategy? Richmond won a premiership with Sean Grigg in the ruck. And then even last year, Collingwood went really, really well with Darcy Cameron. I know Cox was in there a little bit, but Darcy Cameron was shouldering the load. So do you have an opinion on that? I think, sorry, I'm going to cut you off. I've asked you a question. I'll cut you off.
But, go for it.
I think maybe now that there's this big trade, Grundy to Melbourne, everyone's like, oh, wow, the 2 ruck strategy.
Oh, we don't know how it's going to work, first of all.
So, like, what do you think?
I think that, again, as someone who's been watching the AFL maybe a little bit less than you have, I've never sort of subscribed to the value of a really dominant tap ruckman. A lot of the times, you get a hit out to advantage or whatever, that's great. Sometimes it can lead to a really clean possession. You get some good clearances, or if it's in the forward 50, you can get a real clean goal. But I think that those occurrences are fewer and farther in between. And I think the value of having a dominant ruckman is more so in the general play of being an excellent marking target, someone who can cover the ground a lot and sort of get from contest to contest proficiently. So I think that, like, Rowan Marshall may not be the best, like, in terms of, like, Grundy, Gawn, Sean Darcy, Nick Nui, in terms of, like, a tap ruckman. But where he is really elite at, in my opinion, is, like, covering the ground. Yeah. And so I think that when you have a player like that, and if we talk about the sub rule, he's never going to get subbed, right? But I do think that in a team like the Saints, you could have instances where, with that 5th player coming in, maybe in the 3rd quarter, the last quarter, that maybe, for whatever reason, the team wants to sub out a Jack Hayes, or the team wants to sub out one of those tall forwards and go with a bit more of a pressure-style gameplay, go with a bit more of a fast-paced style gameplay. And so you might see a lot of games where they're starting with 2 rucks and then finishing with 1. I think is maybe where we'll see a little bit more of the trend going this way. again, it's going to be team to team dependent. Like if you're Melbourne, I think you've got the two best rucks in the comp. So I think obviously you
probably not
try and steer towards that as your advantage. But for most of the other teams, I think that might be more common this year. What are your thoughts on the sub-rulers in response to your question?
I'll address the sub-rule in a sec, but in terms of the dominant tap ruckman, I think your dominant tap ruckman comes in handy at a centre bounce, especially with the 666 rule. You find guys like Nick Natanui and Gawn, if they can put it down the throat of their midfielders and you can score from centre bounces, then that's where your tap ruckman comes in. But to be honest, around the ground, teams are so good at strucking up around stoppage and behind the ball that winning the tap really is ineffective.
I think first bounce.
Yeah, I think, like you said, you want your ruckman to be a big presence down the line. When you have to kick long down the line, you want to be able to mark some of those. So if your ruckman can do that, and then if your ruckman can be a physical presence around the stoppages as well. You notice all these guys we're talking about, they don't just take ruck contests. They lay tackles, they take marks, they put body on at stoppages, all these little things.
I think Rowan's really good at that.
Definitely. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about your take on the sub rule, but I don't mind it. There could be some teams, if they decide to start with two ruckmen and one of those ruckmen is not much chop, that could end up being a tactical sub. But so much water to go under the bridge. I'm so excited to see what happens this year with the rucks.
Yeah, so just to finish up with Marshall, he's priced at 91.
Yep.
Look, I think there's 110 upside. That gives you nearly 20 points of upside, and that would put you as basically the number one ruck. So to me, unless we are starting with round one, there's Tom Campbell in the side. I mean, that would be a flag for me. But if Rowan Marshall is named in that round one side and there's no one else who's just a pure ruckman in that team, chances are I'm going to start with him in my side. And if the problem comes up, I'll deal with it then. But for me, the upside is too alluring for me to get away from when there's a lot of other question marks and maybe not quite the upside with some of those other top tier ruckmen. So those are just my thoughts for Rowan Marshall. And I think, like you said, if the coach comes out and says, we're just going Marshall all season, he's the number one ruck, that should be nearly 100% rostered because I think, he's got the highest ceiling out of everyone.
Agreed.
All right, let's move on to another sort of stock, steady, really safe pick, Jared Witts.
Yeah, poor Jared Witts almost averaged the same as Rowan Marshall, and he's always the least talked about ruckman. Marshall's the most talked about ruckman. So it just does it in a different way. Like last year, he could have almost been a saving grace for a lot of coaches. I think if you
played
could
22 games off an ACL.
Well, if you could go back in a time machine and say, hey, pick Jared Witts from the start of the season, you just pick him, wouldn't you?
Kicking your feet up.
22 games.
What a relaxed season.
No one could have anticipated that coming off, for a big fella as well, coming off an ACL. So, firstly, congratulations to Jared Witts. So, I don't think many people will really consider him this year, and
he's kind of like the opposite to Riley O'Brien to me. Like, they kind of average similar, but he does it in such a steady, consistent way, and a little bit less of those ceilings and floors, but just rock solid to me. So,
and despite that, I just think if you're looking to win a hat, I think you have to be a little bit ballsy in this department. And I think we've already listed kind of 4 guys for me that I'd be shocked if they averaged less than Jared Witts. So I'm talking Marshall, English, Gawn and Grundy. So as much as you're going to get that safe feeling with Witts potentially, we all want to win hats, so we've got to be ballsy.
He has averaged 104 in the past, one season in 2019 on 22 games, so had a big year that year. But 30 years old, I don't know if we can expect him to sort of, it'd be a pretty bold call to say he's going to come out and have his career best season this year. Look, again, very safe role, very solid. I don't think there's going to be many other, maybe Mubby or Trolls, sort of your chop-out ruckman, but he's not in there 50% of the time. Like, it's sort of that 80-20 split. So I think that you're getting what you paid for. He's going to be around that low 90s kind of range for me. So, again, not much upside. So for me, it's a pretty quick no. Just in terms of my philosophies and what I'm looking for in my team. So,
I agree with
I don't know. Is there anything else you want to touch on with Jared Witts?
No, not really. Poor Wittsy. But I agree with you.
He's in the last 5 seasons, he's averaged 91 points over those 5 seasons. Price at 91 sort of sums up sort of what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so
it is what it is.
Let's move on to the next guy here. Again, another player that I really want to spend a bit of time on because I think he's the other serious option.
At the moment, he's my second ruck, I think, in my team.
Right. So and we've left him to this line, I think, on purpose because Darcy Cameron, he's got the ruck forward status. So you do have some options. You could have him in your forward line. You can have him in your ruck line. I personally lean towards more having him in my ruck line because, like we said in the Forward Premium podcast, there's a lot of good options in the forward line. So I don't necessarily want to be taking up one of those options with Darcy Cameron in there. And when you compare him with some of these other rucks that are a few more question marks over their heads, I think Darcy Cameron is definitely someone that comes in with upside.
Yes.
So he averaged, he's priced at 82, but obviously, you know, the first 6 games of the season he was playing with Brodie Grundy, that severely brings his scores down.
Yeah, that's it. So to talk you through his season, it was a bit of a journey. So the first 5 games he was playing with Grundy, and he had predominantly played forward. He barely scored over 50 in any of those games. There was 170 in there, but barely over 50. And then from that point, the next kind of 7 or 8 games, he was the predominant ruckman. And he went closer to kind of 90, 100 throughout those games.
Yeah, so averaged 92.5 after Grundy got injured.
And then the third kind of part to his season was Mason Cox kind of threw the goggles on and said, watch this, I'm going to jump in and steal some CBAs. And we all cringed because his scoring Darcy Cameron's scoring kind of slowed down towards the end. So I'll lead off with a stat for you. In the 5 games where Cameron played and had 80% or more of his team's hitouts, he averaged 106.
Yeah, right.
So for me, I'm just really interested to see what strategy Colin would adopt there. I think Cameron's going to be the predominant ruckman, but for me, it's whether he has to share that role.
Yeah, so I guess there's another few moving pieces here. One of the more underrated moves I think we have to look at for this situation is that Collingwood also recruited Dan McStay from the Brisbane Lions. Is he coming in and replacing a Mason Cox as the sort of that forward big target? I see McStay maybe less of that chop-out ruckman than a Cox. I also think that, you know, Darcy Cameron, he was thrown into that position sort of midway through the season. Is he now training in preparation to be that number 1 ruckman?
Yeah.
I don't know how much impact that might have, but, you know, a lot of people sort of say that the guy looked like he was tired, you know, and, you know, that when you're not used to being the number 1 ruck, it's a bit of an adjustment for some players to make.
And it's a different type of running going from a forward.
Yeah, so to me, I think, you know, priced at 82, I think he's at least a 92 guy. So I think there's at least a minimum 10 points of upside.
Well, you can imagine how much those first 5 games bring his average down.
Yeah. So, you know, even if we take into account those poor scores at the end, after round 6, when Grundy goes down, he averages 92.5. You know, in games where he's over 50% CBAs, he's averaging 96.5. So, you know, even when he's just around that sort of like 60% CBA guy, he's right up there mid-90s. So for me, when I compare him to someone like a Tim English, he's like $180,000 cheaper. The starting price is 20 points difference, but I think the end result might be about maybe 10 points difference. So I think you're getting like a run-up of 10 points on a player like Tim English. I think he's still going to be maybe not quite the scorer that Tim English is, and his role might be less secure. But I think that the upside in terms of his starting price and what you could do with that 180,000, I think for me has got me leaning more towards Darcy Cameron at this point.
Yes.
So that's sort of my thinkings at the moment.
Something else that gives me a little bit of confidence with Darcy Cameron as well is that we know Fly McRae is kind of implemented a little bit of that Richmond style over at Collingwood, and over the years where Richmond was a powerhouse, predominantly they've kind of played with the single ruckman model. So it's obviously Nank. I know very early on there was a period there where it was Grigg. There have been a couple of instances where Soldo's shared some time with Nank and in big finals as well. But predominantly it's been a single ruck strategy and a game style that's predicated on speed and pressure. So that's kind of what is getting me to lean towards Darcy Cameron, as well as that value that Mitch spoke about and what you can do with that cash. For me, if I was tossing up between Cameron and English, as it is today on the 26th of January, it's probably Cameron, just because I can use some of that extra cash elsewhere.
What are your thoughts on then, say if I was a bit unsure and I wanted to start, a Tim English, a Rowan Marshall, but I also wanted to have a Darcy Cameron in my forward line as like a eject button if something goes wrong or something like that as like a fail safe. Do you see the value in that, or what are your thoughts there?
I don't see the value in that because two things. You mentioned we've got so many good options in the forward line, but I don't know whether you need an eject button in your team in fantasy. We have so many trades, and I know sometimes people think, I need to cover this or I need to do this. But at the end of the day, you do have so many trades. Even those people that might have traded in Tim English twice into their team throughout the season, they still weren't short on trades. Maybe it makes a slight difference, but I don't think you need to start going into insurance policies.
Yeah, and it's like on that 5% chance that someone gets injured. If that happens in round 10 and you've done that and you've sacrificed 10 points a week, there's 100 points by the end of that sort of 10-week period. Yeah, sure, you might save yourself 40 or 50 points by using a trade and getting a better player, but in the long run, I think you're actually hurting yourself. And I think this year, in terms of the R3 position, again, a lot can change. We're still in January, but I think that there's not really many standout R3 options that are playing. So last year we had a few R3 options that were coming through, like a Jack Hayes. You could just have a floating donut and put a ruck forward option in that R3 option. And if you ever did want to trade a forward to upgrade to a ruck or whatever the case may be, that can provide you flexibility with the utility position. So I think that utility position is still maybe underutilized for those kind of creative trades. So I don't necessarily think the value of hiding a ruckman in your forward line for that flexibility is probably not quite as beneficial as some might think.
Yeah, and I think if you were trying to be creative with a donut ruck forward in your ruckman, maybe you could be thinking about potentially a Gorn getting forward status, and you're trying to do something creative there at round 6. I think.
But I think you're just getting a little bit ahead of yourself when you start to think that way.
There's too many ifs.
So I really like Darcy Cameron at this stage. Look, hopefully we don't hear too many USA chants this year. Still haunts.
Take those goggles off, Mason, please.
Still haunts my memories back in 2018 when I took Ellie to their prelim final. But so look. I mean, I personally just don't think that, Mason Cox is all that good of a footy player. I mean, he shows some moments, but from a seasonal point of view, I think the
Pies obviously see a little bit there. But like you said, that McStay trade probably makes a little bit of a difference. I think if Cox was in there for a little bit of his forward stuff, and if you get McStay in there, then. Yeah. And
they were really sharing, so from round 12, 13 onwards, it's 57-43, 58-42, 56-44, 52-48, 55-45. So they're nearly splitting that ruck roll in half. There was a game even where Cameron played 31% and Cox played 69%. That can have a significant upside for Darcy Cameron, in my opinion. So I think he's at least a 95 with the upside of maybe getting to that low ton if he is more so 70, 75 plus CBAs. So I do like him as an option. Let's keep powering through these next guys here.
Scotty Lycett.
Scotty Lycett, maybe a little bit of a left field option, but comes in with a bit of a discount this season. Only played, was it the 4 games last season, if I bring that up?
It was 4, Mitch,
so 4 games last year. Gets the discount based on that, but again, discounted on his 2021 season, which unfortunately was his best season of his career from a fantasy point of view. So that was his highest average at 85.6.
And that's it. To summarise my thoughts on Scotty Lycett, it's this. He's priced at more than 600K, I believe. And
priced at 70.
Yeah, so he's priced at 70. His best ever season is 84. He's too expensive to be a cash cow.
Stepping stone.
But he's not enough to step you. He's in no man's land. He's not going to significantly outperform his average. He might by 10 points, but that's not enough for me. There's just a heap of flags, and he's just unfortunately stuck in that no man's land for me.
Yeah. I think he's maybe not a horrible option. I think I agree he's probably at least 10 points unders, which, you could say maybe similar to Darcy Cameron, but I think Darcy Cameron just has that upside that he could go more. It's a minimum of 10, maybe 15 to 20 if everything goes right, whereas Scott Lycett, if everything goes right, it's 11 or 12. Do you know what I mean? It's not that ceiling that we might want, but I still think he is of value. So I think he is underpriced, but and his role I think is going to be pretty safe. I think he'll be in there sort of 80+% time. Not really worried about Finlayson coming in and doing more of that, or Bryn Tickle. I don't think that they're going to, if Lycett's healthy, I think he's going to be in there, but like we sort of said, 2021 was his highest year, 85.6. You're sort of still 20 points off the number one ruck. So for me, it's just a little bit, like I said, awkward in that kind of a price range. But still upside, I think, from the pick. Any much more you want to say about him? Or
no, not much more to talk about with Scotty. Want to move on to Lloyd?
Yeah, so Lloyd Meek, I'm putting him here because I've seen people talk about him, and I see he is owned in some teams out there. So I think if I put up, again, if I look at my rucks and the ownership percentages, he's owned in 11.3% of leagues, which is higher than Lycett, it's higher than Max Gawn, it's higher than Grundy, it's higher than Riley O'Brien, higher than Sean Darcy. He's owned in more places than I thought, and I just can't really understand why.
I think we've got two factors here that are pushing people in this. Okay, so we've got the new club factor. Okay, that's the one thing. And he's going to a club that people often associate, if you're going to a club that's been bad for a little while, that suddenly that means opportunity. So there's the first factor. Yep. And the second factor is that he's shown an ability to score well in the waffle. So playing for Peel, he often went above the ton. He had 30 to 40 hit outs, and he scored well in the waffle. But we know it's different playing at league level as well. For me, if you're not going to pick him on your ruck bench, he's almost $500,000.
Yeah, it's too expensive.
I think that would be obnoxious. And then if you decide to pick him at R2, I'd want to see you do something unbelievable with that money.
Yeah, that's
right. You know what I mean? It's like if people are justifying putting him at R2, yes, he may have significant value upside, but I'd want to see what you're doing with that money if you're going to put him at R2.
Like, here's the stat here. So he averaged 54.7 in games where he got more than 65% CBAs over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
He averaged 62.2 in 5 games last year in that scenario. So when he's the number one ruck, he's still only averaging 60. It's not like he's coming out and, the Braden Preuss scenario last year, we had samples of him when he was the number one ruck. He was sort of that 85-90 guy. We had that data there. But for Lloyd Meek, we haven't seen it yet at AFL level. Yes, you can point to the junior numbers, but I think that for me to start my R2 with a cheaper ruck like that, I'd want more confidence to pick a player like that when I could just spend an extra couple of $100,000 and get a player like Darcy Cameron and still have that same kind of upside in terms of his starting price. So
see, this is where it could go really bad. Let me give you the scenario. So you pick.
Plus, I got 3 rucks. Well, sorry to cut you off if that's where you were going.
No. I was going to say it could go really bad. Let's say you pick Lloyd Meek at R2. Yeah, he's priced at 53, and then he starts averaging 60.
Yeah,
where do you go? Because here's the scenario. It's like, well, if you go down, maybe there's no rookie ruck options available.
You're scrambling,
and then
you got to go up.
Well, but how do you got to go? Like if you want to go up to a premium from there, you got to find $400K somewhere.
Yeah.
So you could really shoot yourself in the foot with this one if he doesn't come out. If he comes out and he averages 85, then well done.
Cool, you got 30 points of upside.
You made a heap of cash. But if he comes out and he's averaging 60. You could find yourself in a really tricky position.
Yeah. It's too much of a risk for me to take. I don't see it really at all personally. And like I sort of said, like there's 3 ruckmen in that team. There's Reeves.
Yeah.
You've got Lynch and you've got Lloyd Meek.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a scenario where he comes out and averages 85% CBAs
and just
is the guy.
Yeah.
Lynch they brought in from last year, and Reeves still seems like he's the guy that's the number one dude. And he's obviously the tallest of all of them, probably the best tap ruckman. Like, best case scenario, I see him maybe doing 65%, and that's sort of what we've sort of shown as sort of averaging 60 for him in the past. So, again, it's just a situation I'm very anti. If you're leaning that way, I think you can do better with your cash.
Yeah, and all that being said, we're always open to hearing everyone else's opinion as well. So if
I've missed something...
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have a different opinion and you've got some stats to back it up, we always love to hear that, just so that we can be more well educated as well.
But right now, I'm just not seeing it. So that will do it for us with our rucks here, guys. If you haven't checked out,
take a deep breath.
Yeah, I know. Lots to talk about. So I think for me, the main 3 players I'm considering are Tim English, Rowan Marshall and Darcy Cameron. I think that they are probably the most common. There's maybe potential you could have all 3, have Darcy in your forward line. I'm leaning to not doing that.
Marshall, Cameron.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at the moment as well. I think I can use that cash a little bit better, but again, I think those three are all under serious consideration. So, but let us know what you guys think. Also, if you haven't checked out all of our other positions, we've gone through all the forwards, midfielders, defenders, talking overpriced, underpriced, and mid prices. Next week or starting Sunday, we're going to be going through a bit of a team reveal early on in the preseason, and then talking some points of difference. Both we'll talk popular players and who we may be going against, and also those players who are lowly owned and could be the separator for you early in the season. So make sure you stay tuned for that one. If you are listening along on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating if you do enjoy the content. And I've seen some really great comments in the YouTube comment section. If you would want to, really would appreciate, just take those same comments, go over to Apple Podcasts, chuck them in there, attach it to a 5-star rating, and that would be amazing because it would help us out, grow the channel, grow the podcast so we can hit more viewers and keep doing what we're doing. But otherwise, subscribe, thumb up the video, and we'll see you guys next time. Laters.